Perhaps you've heard me say this before. You don't have to test all of your software, only the software that's actually running. I think this whole idea goes back to the early 1990s when static code analysis was big. Parse every line of code that's written, look for those common weakness enumerations or CWEs, look for those common vulnerabilities and exploits or CVEs. And then the companies that do static analysis, they talk about code coverage and how their product can go through more code faster than the others. Yeah, but what if that code doesn't actually execute? Cool, you just checked all this dormant code, and that dormant code, it now occupies most of your remediation time. And then you complain about how the list of vulnerabilities, it keeps growing. Turns out there's a better way. How about securing the running code? The 40% or so that actually executes. And now your vulnerability list is greatly reduced. Now you're actively securing running code, either in the software or in the firmware. And because you don't have to check down every vulnerability, how about focusing on just a handful that affect your business or your industry? Now the problem of securing ICS software seems a lot more manageable, doesn't it? In a moment, I'll talk with somebody who founded a company that's been leading the way in runtime security. This is a story about how securing runtime code in OT and ICS systems can be manageable, given the late start and the sheer diversity of systems that are involved. I'm Robert Famosi. This is Error Code.
I am Jeff Williams. I'm the CTO and founder at Contrast Security. Contrast is an application security platform based on runtime security. So we watch applications run, we see where they're vulnerable, we see where they're attacked, and we put it all in context for you so you can focus on what really matters.
So what has Jeff seen in the OT space, particularly vulnerabilities that are associated with software and firmware that's running on OT environments?
Yeah, it's a real challenge for companies because it's so impractical to update that software. It's often on devices that are mounted on poles in the middle of the forest, and companies haven't kept good records about what versions are deployed in what places. They certainly don't have SBOMs. They don't know what vulnerabilities are where, and so it's a real difficult problem. They don't know if they need to go climb the poles and patch the device or even how they could. Like, not all of them, you can't just plug a USB drive into all of them. Some of them are just running there. So it's a really complicated problem.
With OT, some of these devices are running RTOS. They're not even running common operating systems like Linux, Windows, Android. They're running code that's all proprietary.
Yeah, and there's a ton of them, which makes it really difficult for automation. To build a tool that detects vulnerabilities in all different platforms, all different places is really impossible. I don't know. I think you got to eat that elephant one bite at a time, right? Like you've got to pick challenges that are critical and figure out a way to overcome them. Sometimes you can put protections upstream. Maybe you can figure out a way to patch the device. Maybe you have to scrap them and redeploy.
Obviously, the best thing is to build in security first, rather than shipping it out and then trying to patch it later.
In theory, that would be great, but I've been doing application security for 30 years. I started on a super highly secure Navy project, B2 in the Orange Book, if you're familiar. And we were trying to build security in, right? Like, we started with a formal model and we went to a top level spec and a detailed spec and implementation and test cases. And we had traceability between all those layers. And unfortunately, that approach just does not work today. Like, software moves way too fast. And even if you did all that, you could still end up with a vulnerability in one of the components you chose. And you tried to build it in, but you got your rug pulled out from underneath you when you're already in production. So I actually think it's better to be really good at monitoring what you've deployed, understanding what it is and how it works and what it's doing, and being able to respond really quickly when you discover something anomalous.
As I've said, there are various ways of testing software. There's the static code analysis way, which parses lines of code that's as written. What Jeff's company does is it looks at runtime security. He's executing the code in a sandbox, per se, and looking at how the code actually executes. In some cases, there might be sections of code that never execute in runtime.
That's right. And so why are you wasting your valuable security hours fixing vulnerabilities in code that never runs? It's a little crazy. And actually, so we measure it because we watch applications run all the time. And we know that 62% of open source libraries never load at all. They don't even load into memory, much less run. So focus on the 38% of libraries, and not all your custom code is running. So I want you to focus on what really matters. And I think, generally it would be great if we kept all of our libraries up to date, but I mean, most companies have a serious problem with, millions of vulnerabilities in their backlog. We got to start with the things that are most critical. What's really deployed in production, what's really running, what's exploitable, and what's currently being targeted by attackers. That's where you want to focus.
So that 60% of the code that may not be running, is there a threat in having that code on the device? Can it be leveraged in some bad way?
Attackers might be able to use it as part of an attack. However, in order to make that code run, the attacker has to have the ability to basically run arbitrary code. And if they can already do that, it's like, well, yeah, they might be able to use the fork in the silverware drawer after they broke into the house, but don't fix the fork. Jesus, close the window. Oh, the 38%, yeah, absolutely. The 62%, you can put that on the back burner.
Okay, so let's focus on that 38%, because that code's actually interacting with other components and other things like software libraries or...
It's both custom code and libraries that are running, the active ones. And there's been a lot of attention on the open source components over the last 5 years or so. But frankly, the really bad vulnerabilities are mostly in your custom code. Time and time again, it's the custom code that developers write that burns you. Open source actually does a pretty good job at security across the board compared to custom code written by developers in an enterprise. So, it's important to see the whole thing and focus on the criticals. I actually don't care if it's an open source library or if it's custom code, put them in the order of seriousness and consider your attackers in your production environment when you're thinking about what's the most critical. A SQL injection, most like a static analysis tool or something will tell you that's critical. But it's not. It might not ever run. Even if it does run, data might not flow to it. And even if it is running and data flows to it, it might not be that interesting. Like attackers may not have discovered it. They might not be attacking it. So I want you to focus on the things that are really exploitable and really currently being attacked. Do that first. Then come back and, fix the stuff that might get attacked.
So given that it's proprietary code, AI vibe coding, this is the new stuff that's coming in. Is it too early to start to see evidence of whether it's good, bad, otherwise?
It is early, but I think it's pretty clear that AI generated code is based on the code that's out there, which is relatively full of vulnerabilities, and it's going to produce the same kind of level of code that's the code that's out there. But so I don't really think it's worth getting into. Is it a little bit more secure, or a little bit less secure than what humans generate? Who cares? What does matter is it's generating code at 160% at speed or 180% speed. It's more code faster. So even if it's exactly the same as what your humans are producing, now you're producing 60% more. So I haven't seen security team expanding by 60% to handle load, right? So that's a problem. That means we're going to have more live vulnerabilities in production, and all the more reason to prioritize based on real runtime production context.
What are some best practices that developer companies can start to do today?
I think of it in 3 layers. And so the first layer is what I'll call context, is you got to understand what code you got and how it behaves in production. And you don't really get that when you just scan individual repos with a static tool. Like you just see a little, strobe light visibility, right? Uh, but when you look at production, you can see the real fully assembled code, what it's connecting to. It's got real users and real data and real connections. It's not like a test environment where everything's mocked out. And so getting an understanding of how an enterprise application layer works, and not just one app at a time, but how all of them work together, we call it digital twin.
A digital twin is a virtual representation of a physical device. Back in episode 2 of Error Code, I talked about a team that built a digital twin of a satellite that was used in Hackasat 3 at DEF CON. A digital twin of a physical satellite that would be launched and used in Hackasat 4. Why would Jeff's company build a digital twin if you're looking at a real-time code?
And the idea is we're creating a model of your entire application layer, and then on that wireframe, we add tons of context, like what's the attack surface, where are the vulnerabilities, where are the defenses, where are the interesting assets, and we map all that out so that when a new vulnerability gets discovered, you can put it in context and you can say, okay, well, there's a new unsafe digitalization vulnerability in that API, and you can look at the blast radius and say, oh, well, look at the systems around it to see what might get compromised. And I think that's, to me, that's kind of the essence of ADR, is getting that visibility. So that's level 1, right? It's all about context. Now, level 2 is about collaboration. And once you have all that shared context, now you want to think about the workflows. And the cool thing is there's really only 2 major workflows in AppSec. There's responding to incidents in production. That's something that operations does. And frankly, they're pretty much blind to AppSec today. So ADR, because all they have is a WAF, and the WAFs are super noisy and they miss a lot of stuff. So they don't know it. They might even be feeding that data into their SIM and never looking at it. I've talked to like 100 CISOs and they don't look at it. So they're not really getting the advantage. So this workflow of getting that data to the operations teams in the form that they can understand and use is critical. So that's like the next level of what ADR provides, is like, how do we get that workflow going so they can respond? But that's not the end of the story, because if there's a real attack against a real vulnerability, you need to have another workflow for the developers to go fix that underlying vulnerability, right? So there are 2 workflows, but they're connected. And most people don't think of attacks and vulnerabilities being like 2 sides of the same coin. Just because the way the industry is, they're completely separated, separate teams, separate tools, separate everything. That's what siloed means.
Are we talking about DevSecOps?
But DevSecOps, the idea is to break down the silos. So we're giving one model to work off, one incident with its underlying issue, and there's 2 workflows off of that, but they can collaborate. Like operations could say, hey, we put an IP block on this, but we can't fix this forever. Like, you guys got to go fix this. Alternatively, they might say, hey, we're going to turn on blocking in ADR and stop that forever, so you don't have to worry about fixing it. The teams need to work together. Otherwise, they're both doing the identification, they're both doing the triage, they're both doing it's all duplicative and wasteful. Okay. 3rd level is really about culture. And most organizations never get close to this. But I've worked with a few companies in the financial industry that have really figured out a culture of security. Well, I think DevSecOps is more about like the workflows. It's like a little more practical. Like culture is like, what do you prioritize? What do you value? And companies that really value security, when they have the design meeting to build a new thing, security is a part of it. It's naturally part of it. And it's hard to get to this level of culture, but I believe you can't get there without going through the context and collaboration phases. Then you can get to this level where people really start thinking like, oh, security is actually really important to this company. It also takes some, executive level drive. Things like Bill Gates, at Microsoft, he wrote the Trustworthy Computing memo, which set a tone, right? But that's kind of how I think you get to that culture. I mean, most companies are like, putting out fires and frankly don't care. They want to check the box and move on to building cool stuff, which is, it's not great for consumers, but they get a lot of code written. But yeah, some companies, and actually, I don't think it slows them down. I don't think it slows innovation. I think it actually speeds it up. We're watching the code run, and we're getting all this telemetry from everything that we see going on that's security relevant in a whole application layer. It could be thousands of applications. All the telemetry is coming together. Well, we could stick it in a big table or something and try and look up against it, but that's not where the value comes from. The value comes from taking that telemetry and building a model. It's a representation of this whole enterprise worth of software. And imagine if you're going to go do a threat model. You can take the graph and you can say, show me the architecture blueprint for that application. And you can see all the attack surface, all the controls, all the dangerous stuff that app does, all the backend connections. And so you start from a much higher spot than what you would normally. I did a lot of threat modeling in the day, and mostly it's like, hey, could we get an interview with you? And could you send us the spreadsheet with the latest stuff in it? Like, Visio diagrams from 3 years ago. Like, it's really hard. Pen testing too. It's the same thing. Pen testers usually start with a blank slate. And why don't we hand them the architecture and say like, hey, this is what we see actually run. Then you can spend your time on the stuff that's really interesting and hard instead of wasting their time testing stuff that you can automate, like SQL injection.
Most of this testing that we've talked about is for the IT space.
Oh, well, I mean, that's what Contrast does, but there's no reason that you can't do it for OT if you have a way to instrument those things, which is tricky.
True. So
I believe the future, though, like my vision is that the future is all software will be instrumented for security, always reporting telemetry about anomalies and so on, because, well, it just makes sense. I mean, complex things, we instrument them. Your car is instrumented, airplanes are instrumented, industrial factories. I don't know if you've probably seen industrial factories because you work in OT, but industrial factories are instrumented like crazy. They've got sound, vibration, temperature, smoke, all kinds of instrumentation. And why? Because it tells them that there's a problem before there's a problem. Software is the most complex thing man has ever created, but we barely instrument it at all. We got log files and that's it. And they're full of garbage. Literally, that's it. So, I think security is the first best use case for instrumentation, but everything's going to be instrumented.
Static analysis is also known for its high number of false positives, and they've been known for that for a long time. To Jeff's point, 60% of the code doesn't actually run, so you're spending time on these CWEs that may or may not come to bear.
Well, I have seen a lot of focus on runtime. So there's a pendulum in security that it swung to static for a long time. And now I think, and agentless, which is kind of the same thing. It's like reading logs instead of like instrumenting, right? And the pendulum swinging back because people want that richness and that context because they're getting overwhelmed with alerts that are really all false positives. So like that's one interesting trend towards runtime agent kinds of technologies.
Are people waking up to the benefits of runtime security versus static analysis?
Yeah, I do think that modern software development has pushed the boundaries of traditional security beyond the breaking point. And so people are looking for better, more accurate automation. But I also think it's AI. Runtime and AI go together really naturally because good AI requires gold data. And building a complex AI thing on top of garbage data that you get out of your SaaS is not going to make you more secure. But when you have really gold data that directly measured from real running code, then the AI can provide a lot of extra insight and value.
I wonder if that's because of continuous integration and continuous deployment, or CI/CD. The fact that today we're constantly updating code in live environment.
So there's all these companies that are trying to add what's called reachability to their static product. But what it means is like hey, we discovered this vulnerability, but we want to check to see if it's actually reachable. Like we see a vulnerability in a library, but is it reachable from the code? And I always tell people like, well, reachable is just like one more step towards exploitability, but it's not that big a step. It's got to be reachable, but it's also got to like the data has to be able to reach it, and that code has to go to production, and it has to be discovered by an attacker, and it has to be actually exploitable by an attacker, and then it has to be actually exploited. That's the steps. And so reachability is good. It helps a little bit, but what you really want is to look at production and what's actually going on in the real world.
Any final thoughts, closing thoughts on the state of software security today? Are we getting better at it?
Well, I've been doing this a long time. I wrote the OWASP Top 10 in 2002, and it's still basically the same stuff. So are we getting better? I don't know. I mean, I guess I'll leave it with what I'm really worried about is, and it brings it back to OT a little bit, because now software is being used to drive a lot of stuff in the real world. Like it's not just, online banking. It's medical technology and airplanes and cars and, all kinds of everything is going to be controlled. Construction. Actually, we have a big customer that makes big construction vehicles, and you would think, all right, why is that software? Well, all of those things are online. They're clients connecting to SaaS services, telling them where to drive and what to do. I mean, it's a lot. And so I worry especially that when we hook up AI to that through some MCP AI, interface, somebody's going to say like, put in a prompt that says, I don't know, like, hey, fly your plane closer to Detroit or whatever. And it's just going to mess it up. It's going to hallucinate, and some really bad things are going to happen that hurt a lot of people. Most financial things are unwindable, but human life it's scary.
I'd like to thank Jeff for coming on the show and talking about runtime security and how it can be useful in OT and ICS systems, in addition to IT networks. Hey, if you're enjoying Error Code, tell a friend. I'm sure there are other people out there who like narrative information security podcasts. And I'd really like to hear from you. Go to errorcodepodcast.com to get more details. And tell me what you like, and even what you don't. I've got some great episodes coming up. We'll have more on Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, and hacking utilities supply chains. Subscribe today. I don't want you to miss out.